Hi, I'm Rajiv, and today I'm joined by Alexa Figuerres, who is now a very good friend, and she's here for another episode of My Tudor Costume. Alexa, thanks for coming to my place today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Last time we were at Alexa's studio. Alexa is a menswear tailor, and she works in the costume industry. Very often in the last few years, when I've seen something historic, like a TV show or a movie, I think, I wonder. And then I reach out to Alexa and ask her if she's worked on anything in that production, and sure enough, she usually says yes.
Yeah.
So
Big.
and not just historic things, but I was watching this show, Only Murders in the Building, and sure enough, Alexa, what did you made?
I got to make something for Meryl Streep, which was very cool, and apparently she said she was taking it home with her.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What was it?
I made a coat for her.
A tweed coat.
Yes, yeah. Had some very boxy shoulders.
And when I was in your studio, you were working on a vest for Martin Short, right?
Yes, yeah. I also got to make a full suit for Martin Short.
Wow. And then more recently, I was watching this fascinating historic show about New York, The Gilded Age, and your studio's made things for that show too?
Yes, we make all the leads' costumes for Gilded Age, like all those beautiful dresses.
Wow.
Yeah.
So today Alexa's here because the last time we parted ways, you had made my toile, which is the entire outfit made out of a cheaper fabric for the purpose of adjusting the fit. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And between then and now, what happened?
So we fit the toile just to make sure that I could make all the adjustments before going into the more expensive fabric. And then I went away and made those corrections to my paper pattern, which we also showed last time. And now I've cut out all your pieces in the expensive real fabric that you're going to use and sew together. And I've hand sewed the costume, but not to the degree that it is finished, because we want to do one more fitting before we put the slashes and all the decorative bits onto it, and then I hand it off to you to make.
So I am going to actually sew the pieces together by hand the way it would have been done in the 1600s. Mm-hmm. So I will let you reveal what you have brought with you. It's exciting.
Should I bring out the costume or should I just bring out the slashes?
I think the costume first.
So we've got your hose.
So the fabric that I chose was something that would have been kind of typical for this time period, especially in those Dutch portraits.
Yeah.
Black silk.
We got a beautiful Duchess silk satin. So that Duchess satin is the very heavyweight stuff, and silk is what it's made out of. It's important to note that silk and satin are not interchangeable. Satin is the type of weave, and silk is the fiber that it's made out of. So you can have things like polyester satin, but these ones are real. So those are your hose.
This is so exciting. Look at the lining.
Yes, and that's going to be your linen lining.
Wow.
And I just have a temporary waistband on here so that we didn't wear out the fabric of the real waistband quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
But. And then we have your lovely doublet. Here, let's.
Oh my gosh. I also think that even at this stage, all of the basting in here, it's so beautiful to see this. So I think before I try it on, I would just love to talk to you and mainly to our audience about this whole process of having clothing custom made. Today, you and I are undertaking this project, and it is a transaction as a costume. But at the time, in the 1600s, if someone was having a piece of clothing made, especially someone that could afford 6-ply silk, it would be done this way.
Yeah, definitely. So I've used a few more modern techniques when basting in my tailoring, because the whole history of tailoring It kind of starts here where tailors are using these interlinings to make the garments more stiff, and these linings are what would have been used to fit your client who gets to wear this beautiful thing in the end. And we have patches like here of Demet to kind of build up a little bit more stiffness and just durability in certain areas and make it more smooth.
What is Demet?
So Demet is a type of wool, and it's like a felt, essentially. And we use it in tailoring today to create strong shoulders and just create smoother silhouettes. So that's what we have in here.
All of the garments that you'll see in paintings from the early 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s, all of that stuff was custom made. And even a farmer, even a fisherman's wife wearing a dress by the water, selling fish, that was made to measure. Yes. by her. She made it, but she made it completely to fit her. And I think that that is such a huge aspect of why even a simple working class garment today, if we looked at it in a painting, it's a beautiful thing. Because it's not about a body type. It's the fact that the clothes fit the person. Just because you buy something off the rack, it doesn't mean that it fits you perfectly. And sometimes you don't need to do very much, but you can take it to someone who can adjust little elements of it to make it fit you beautifully.
Yes.
This whole process has just been fascinating to me because I've done this with suits, but I've never really done it with a historic piece. Should I try this on?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we want to put this on your high waist.
Like my real waist.
Your real waist.
It feels like a real custom fit.
Ooh. Isn't that fun?
Oh my God.
These were made with the adjustments that we
did
last
right.
time,
I remember
so,
that. Yes. Yeah. Okay, here goes. Wow. Okay. Alexa, I'll just let you do all the whatever you need to do to.
Oh, he looks so regal.
Oh, that this tutu flesh would melt.
There we are.
And I will be wearing a shirt with sleeves under this.
Yeah.
Which is good. Can't see myself. What do you think?
I think you look very handsome. Ooh. There's just such a lovely volume on the trunk hose, and the fabric that you pick just stands out so much.
Let's see how it feels and looks when I sit.
Ooh.
Oh, hello.
Historically in men's tailoring, the goal was to create a smooth body shape of whatever was the fashionable silhouette of the period. So a couple decades previous to this period, men were very into peascods, which was actually a part of the belly that was built up so that you get this very round part. Yeah.
Like this shape.
So Henry VIII, who was a very big man to begin with, but they built up his doublet so that he would be very pigeon-breasted all the way down to his belly, and that was called a peascod. That eventually evolved into this later period where we have padding, such as the Demet that we showed earlier, inside to just create a nice foundation, but it's not to build up the belly anymore. And it's also shifted up into the chest to create this very smooth, sloping shoulders, because strong shoulders were not really a big thing into the later half of the 19th century. So we like men with very sloping. That's why the arm's eye starts down here, and for it to just kind of flow into the arms nicely. So that's why we build up the parts of tailoring right here, and also there's some in the back to support the arm.
And that's the stuff on the inside that
Yes.
you've added.
Yes. And previous to this, it's theorized that men would actually stuff things like hay and sawdust inside their clothes to create those shapes. And the idea of tailoring comes much later, and it's not named as tailoring until a couple decades, even a century later. But that was the version of it beforehand.
That they were doing it themselves?
Yes.
To create a shape.
To create a shape.
Fascinating. Everybody needs a manservant. Or woman servant. Is it a manservant because the servant's a man, or is it a manservant because he's serving the man?
Oh, that's a good question. I
That's
haven't thought about
what
that one.
I always thought it was a manservant because it was like it's the servant for the man.
I'll be a valet.
Wow. I love what the insides of these look like. This linen. Delicate. Gently.
It won't be so delicate once you put them together.
Yeah, but at this stage it's pretty oh,
But this is basically what it's going to look like when it's done. As you can see, I've just basted it together with big stitches instead of taking all the time to do the like very fine hand sewing. But like we needed it to be at a place where it's as close to possible as finished.
And this is one of those places where when this garment is finished, like even this seam will be hand sewn.
Yep.
And only I will see it.
Yep.
Like when I take off the hose, which I love that. Like there's going to be parts of this that I'm going to do all this work and no one's going to see it except me. Now that we have an idea of how the garment fits, everything is going to be taken apart again?
Yes, because I need to slash the top layers because that is the decoration of this chosen piece.
Alexa, can you talk about slashing and what it was and why it was done and what the trend came from?
So the trend is really funny. I like to compare it to like ripped jeans. It was this idea that you got in a duel, so
Like a sword fight.
Yeah, you look kind of like buccaneery and like, you know, cool and rebellish. So there's like slashes in your clothes. So I would call it kind of the prerequisite to that.
So imagine at the time in the 1600s, a man challenges another man to a duel, and they're wearing their fancy clothes. And they go out and they get in a sword fight, and the battle scars are the slashes in the clothing. And the very fact that that led to this trend of one slash, a few, and then slashes all over, that's kind of fascinating.
And of course, that's just a theory, but they're all strategically placed in the same way that like, I've strategically ripped my t-shirt to, you know, show off certain parts or like the knees of my jeans.
Yes. And this was a very common way of embellishing clothing in the 1600s?
Yes, it's surprisingly easy and we'll demonstrate soon, but when you cut it on the bias, then it doesn't fray, so it's just kind of a fun texture to give the silk.
You can see that as the silk moves, you see the texture. Please explain to us what we have here. This is fascinating to me.
Should I pull out the book?
Sure, yes, yeah, actually that's a great idea.
These are the samples I did to try and emulate these slashing effects on the extant piece that we're trying to replicate with yours. So obviously we did different colors, but...
So when I decided I want a forever Halloween costume and I wanted it to be a Tudor costume, I decided to actually pick something that exists. We don't actually have a lot of pieces of men's clothing from the 1600s in museum collections. They just didn't survive. But this is something that actually exists at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And what's very interesting is that the painting of its owner also exists. So we can see what it looked like in 1618. That's when this painting was painted. And then we can also see what it looks like today. And the colors have changed drastically. But this is great because we now have something to work from if we want to try to reproduce it as accurately as possible. So Alexa has looked very closely at both the original garment and this painting. And Alexa, this sample is, can you walk us through the different versions of what you've done here?
So I've attempted two different versions to get two different effects. The slashes will be done the same way. I took a chisel and I took a mallet to it and I hammered into the silk, and I cut these 2-inch long slashes in it. But the stippling, which were the columns in between, I was trying to figure out a good way so that it will read nicely in the fabric that you chose. More traditionally, it would have been done this way with an awl, which is a pointy tool, and I just shoved it into the fabric and basically pushed little holes into it.
Yep.
The thing with this technique is that it doesn't break the fabric.
Yep.
The awl is so sharp that it pushes the fibers aside. So this has less of a chance to rip the fabric.
Okay.
This I tried. I can't find an exact historical precedence for it, but I wouldn't be surprised. It's just a hole punch, which I also took a mallet to and punched out these pieces. And the nice thing about this is, even though it shows a bit more so you can see the fabric underneath it, but also because of the thick weave of this silk and because it's in a hole shape, it's not going to fray too badly, because every point on that circle is on the bias.
Okay. So if we were to just cut slashes in the same direction as either the warp or the weft,
They would start fraying like this.
and that was crucial to this process. So all the slashes on these old garments, you'll see they're not just randomly placed because they look nice that way. There's a technical reason why they're placed on an angle. It's so that you have that cut that looks like it was just a sword cut, but it's not going to fray open, and the garment is actually not going to fall apart, which you might assume, like, wait a minute, with something with that many slashes in it, isn't it just going to fall apart? And the answer is no. Okay, so going back to, like, creatively speaking, what versions do you like?
I'm inclined for this because it's a bit more historical, but the thing is it's very subtle, and you can tell that from pictures too. You can only just barely see the stippling. It's mostly about the slashes, and especially because there's a contrasting fabric underneath this one. But because you chose black on black, I almost would suggest that we go with this one, because there's going to be more texture and you're still going to be able to see it with black on black.
When I have to make a decision, I usually go with what was my first feeling. And when I saw this, the first thing my eye was drawn to was this. And I like how subtle this is. So with this costume, the thing that I have in mind is that from far away, it's not going to look like much. It's just going to be a silhouette. And I want this to be something that you really only appreciate when you're really up close. And that's what's going to happen with all the hand stitching.
Yeah.
That, I mean, a lot of the work is going to be covered up. It's going to be on the inside. Like, I love that aspect of this. I love that this is really subtle. So can we go with this, please?
Yeah. And I appreciate that that's what your focus is on this costume, because working in film and TV, I feel like this would be something that would get approved because it shows up better, but I like that you want people to get in close.
Yes.
I love that.
Okay, so we'll go with this. Are there differences in the slashes?
There aren't any differences in the slashes. I did them the most efficient way possible, which is get a 2-inch chisel and hammer them in.
Could we see how you did that, please?
Definitely.
Thank you. Okay, let's clear this. This is the weft. This is the warp.
And
Here's
we know this
the
is the selvage.
selvage, the very edge of the fabric. And now,
So I'm gonna find my bias, which is about,
and how do you do that?
so I'm just trying to find
The true diagonal.
the true diagonal, a 45-degree angle from that 90-degree angle. And it doesn't have to be exactly on, but that was the best way that I could square it up, just folding it.
Okay.
And we're gonna call this the back side of my fabric. The fabric doesn't really have a face, both of them are equal. And what I did was I just drew a line with my ruler. So that's gonna be my measurement guide for when I'm doing the slashes. Let's do a couple lines. I figured out that it's about slashes, and then 1 inch over is the stipples, and that's also contained within a block of 1 inch. Okay. This one is quite small, and the slashes in your doublet are about 2 inches wide, so I thought I'd get a bigger chisel, but unfortunately they only make them for wood.
Yes.
but they're still really nice and sharp. So I figured it would work. So I'm gonna...
So the key is that it's sharp.
The key is that it's sharp. And I found that I needed to double tap when I was testing the other ones. The pattern that we're following is slash, non-slash for 2 inches, and then another slash at 2 inches. So they're about equidistant from each other. But right on my line.
Oh, and there's the slash. Okay.
Wow.
So it slashes it open, and this is the thing about this is it is subtle. You only really see it when the thing is moving from the fabric underneath.
Yeah, and it catches the light. So when we turn to the other side where we don't actually have those lines drawn, it's more visible too because of that imperfection in the fabric, essentially.
Right. But it's the even distributing of the imperfection that makes it
A design.
exactly like a pattern over the cloth. May I try?
Yeah.
Please?
So we're gonna go for that
There.
one.
Do you put it towards yourself or away from you?
You know, I found that doing it away from and doing it at a slight angle was
Okay.
the best. Yeah.
Poor neighbors in this building.
Ah, you did it! Yay.
And then
Nice.
flip it over.
Beautiful.
I want to do it again.
Do it.
And this I'm just going to use this mark, like
Yeah,
the
perfect.
beginning of that,
Yeah.
right? Okay. It's kind of addictive.
Yeah.
Not when you have
No,
to do
it's good.
700 of them.
It will be fun.
Oh, that's great. That's so thrilling. I mean, it's so simple,
Yeah.
but it's so effective. Okay, so those are the slashes, right? How about the stippling?
So, based on the way that you said that you want to do it, it was easy. I just take my awl and I literally just poke it into the fabric a billion times. And that's why I draw these guidelines too, because from what I can tell of the extant garment, it seems pretty freehand. I don't think that they went around and marked out every single hole that they were going to poke the awl through. But I want to make sure that they stay on the line of the bias and run parallel to these slashes. So I'm just going to go through and poke those holes. And like I said before, it's scarring the fabric, but it's not breaking anything. It's moving the fibers aside from each other.
It's not taking any fabric away.
Yes, correct. So,
When you think about how much time would have been taken to produce one of these garments, like it's not just the cutting and sewing of the cloth, it's even the weaving and the dyeing of the cloth. Remember, this was at a time before mechanization, so like before electrical power. So even this cloth, like to create this cloth was a lot of work.
yeah,
And that is why we see, even in upper classes, in wills, clothing is mentioned.
and it's passed down.
Yes, and it's not a lot of clothing. I leave my one suit, one doublet, and 2 hose, and 3 shirts to my son, whatever, because it was left to the descendant, and then if the style changed, it was taken back to the tailor and it was adjusted, right?
Yeah, correct. And it's amazing when you see extant pieces that have been adjusted to fit the new time period, because historians can date the fabric from one period and then see that it's been remade.
Like 80 years later. It's also why these houses didn't have closets. They had furniture in which they put their clothing because they didn't have racks and racks of clothing the way we do now. It does look like that painting. Like this right here does have the same feeling of the painting. I love that this part is going to be very close. Thank you, Alexa.
Of course.
What advice do you have for people out there that are interested in learning how to make their own clothes? Because that is something that I am often told by our viewers, like, oh, I've been very intrigued to start thinking about sewing or making clothes, and what advice do you have?
Find a basic sewing class. I think that's so important. It's really wonderful to get inspiration from online tutorials, but find an expert who can guide your hand, whether it's just your grandma or a community sewing class at like the local maker space. It's really nice to be able to work with someone who can show you exactly what needs to be done.
And in those classes, you're often not starting out with any kind of piece of clothing. You're doing the basics, right? Like
yeah, get the basics down. Make a pencil case, make an apron.
Yeah, that is great advice. When I'm intrigued to learn how to do something, I usually start with books, maybe a couple of videos online. But if I reach a point after that where I think, okay, I'm really interested in this, the next thing I do is I look for a teacher or a class. And really, I love that advice, in person. Because being there and having someone show you in person like what you're doing wrong is half of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think I improved greatly the second that I signed up for a sewing class.
I love that. This is so beautiful already. It's just getting better and better and better. I feel so honored and intrigued by having a Tudor costume, mostly made by you. I am planning on doing the sewing.
I hope so.
There's a lot of hand sewing. Wasn't there at one point, wasn't this process at one point you were just going to draft the pattern and I was going to cut everything out?
Rajiv and I were at Comic-Con and he confronts me in the hallway and goes, I'm not sure I could do this.
And
Maybe you should.
And she says, no, you're doing it. And she goes, oh no, but I'm doing this much, but you're sewing this thing. I am not sewing it together. So it's almost there. It's almost in my hands. And at that point, who knows how long it's going to take. But what I do like is Alexa did point out to me, listen, you don't have to think about sitting at your desk at home sewing this thing. You can take 2 pieces on the train. When you go away to Guy Wolf's in Connecticut, you can take another 2 pieces and you can do little bits at a time. And I didn't even think about it that way, but you're so right. This can be like I can replace my knitting with sewing my Halloween costume.
That's the fun thing about historical hand-sewn costumes. You're not confined in front of the sewing machine.
Right. You just need a needle, thread, thimble, beeswax, some linen thread, nice needle case maybe, Addie.
Some snippy snips.
Snips. Also, who's going to make these buttons? Because the buttons on this thing were handmade woven buttons, like on a wooden bead, kind of embroidered. Do you know people? Like how?
I might have a button guy. I'll
Really?
come back to you. We'll see. Yeah, I think I know someone.
That makes buttons?
Genuinely. Yeah.
Because that's kind of daunting. I'm like, I don't think I can make these. Aren't there like 40 buttons on this
Yeah.
thing? Like it's like there aren't any spaces between the buttons. It's just like button, 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 button. Imagine how long it took for him to take off his doublet, in the heat of the moment. How did they take these off?
Well, if you just want to do that, you just remove the cod piece.
Well, Alexa, as always, it is a pleasure and an honor to have you here and to see your beautiful, beautiful work. I can't wait to see the next step.
Me too.
Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Goodbye.